Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of Finance and Corporate Services. We're having a bit of a problem with the computer over here, so I'll be your clerk for this afternoon. We're going to get right into it here. Can I get a mover for the consent items? Moved by Councillor Hernandez, who I can see. Those in favor? And that carries, thank you. So we'll get right into it. We'll begin with item number 3, the Registry Theatre Strategic Refresh. And we'll hear from Mr. Don Bourgeois. Afternoon. Oh, sorry, 1 second here. Your microphone is... What's on here? There we go.
Thank you. So I'm not quite sure, do I press something to advance or? Excellent. We're very pleased to be back. Last autumn indicated that we would carry out our strategic refresh work and come back in late winter, early spring. And given the weather conditions, I think we're still in late winter. We have operated the Registry Theatre, and the purpose of the strategic refresh was really to consider several components, one of which was the ongoing relationship between JM Drama and the city, as whether that is something that should continue, the balance of programming activities at the Registry Theatre, as well as the potential use of the space within the building. Should we look at how to do this? And also to place that in context of broader public policy, recognizing there's only so much money around, so much resources around. What is the best use of those resources? ACAC supported the strategic refresh and recommend that the city support that, and City Council obviously did. We originally were going to do the strategic refresh completely in-house, but then when considered a little bit more, we decided to retain ArtsBuild Ontario so that people could answer questions in a more open and frank fashion. Because it's very difficult for someone, if they have or want to criticize you, to do that to your face. People do it, but I think we found that it was better to have a neutral party, and ArtsBuild Ontario had experience in this sector over the last little while and was an appropriate one. And we also dealt with Walter Fady to provide some estimates. Those estimates are not firm because we're still awaiting as well an audit from the report for the building as to what needs to be done over the next few years. So today is really to report back on the findings. The ArtsBuild report, I think, was very positive. In fact, we were very pleased with it, beyond pleased, in fact. And it looked at an immediate need for affordable rehearsal and performance space. There are two approaches to this, one of which is the proposed addition and renovation at the Registry Theatre, which was carried out, the design concept was carried out by Walter Fady at our cost, and an entrance space or a plan for longer-term permanent additional space, not necessarily at the Registry Theatre, but in other buildings owned or controlled or influenced by the city. I think it's fair to say that ArtsBuild found that the Registry Theatre was very well received, and strong support for the continuation of JM Drama's involvement in the management and the replication of the registry model to the extent feasible in other locations. It also found that the balance of programming, rentals, and other activities is appropriate, but there was room for improvement, and they identified a number of areas that our organization, as well as others, should reach out into in order to move forward. They also indicated, which was important to us from a revenue point of view, that there was room to increase rental costs. And in fact, ArtsBuild didn't identify who said this, but that they were a little bit surprised we hadn't increased rates in some time and they could afford more. And the same thing with respect to HST. So we've taken action now to register for September 1st for HST purposes, which will help some cash flow. The conclusion also was that it's an effective manager of the space and there is confidence, and that's an important part. The sector that uses the space has confidence in JM Drama. There's some suggestions for some minor changes to policies, and we started along that path. Some of them we're not in agreement with, but we certainly want to have those discussions. because we have had different policies at different times that were not effective. But those are things that they're not core issues. Those are things for discussion. The other thing that Arts Bill said is that the city does have a strong role to play alongside JM Trauma to ensure that the space needs of the sector are met. Walter Fady did a potential addition to the back of approximately 740 square feet, which would allow for a rejigging of office, wing space and piano storage. The unfinished basement, underneath the addition, we would move all of our existing storage. We would downsize the existing stuff that we store at the theatre and move all of that into the unfinished basement. And there would also be an exterior loading dock with the ramp. The other renovations that we looked at would be a male change room, female change room. That doesn't sound all that exciting, but the issue around change rooms is particularly poignant when you're dealing with youth. Things have changed from my high school era when you got changed wherever you could get changed, but the perception has changed as society has moved on over the last 50 years or so. The key part, though, would be the ability to create a rehearsal space that mimicked the stage upstairs. In fact, it would be right below the stage, and also to have a multi-purpose room. There would also be improvements to the lobby space that could be accommodated as a result of those changes. The other aspect of it is the missed opportunities that have existed over the last little while if things are not changed. Now, whether I think it is a decision of council as to whether the amounts of money that are necessary to do these renovations is best invested in the Registry Theatre, or is it best invested in other places? And we take a neutral stance on it. We think what we're looking at is a worthwhile investment, but you have a much broader scope of looking at investments in community buildings and community activities, and we're comfortable with whatever that decision is. But certainly we know that in the last 12-month period, we've lost 150 rental dates because we're fully occupied. So there are rental opportunities out there for a performance space. That's amounted to about $40,000 in missed revenue for the Registry Theatre. But the missed opportunity is not strictly a revenue point for us, it's also that missed revenue for those performers, or that missed opportunity for community groups to learn things from a recreational activity, etc. It's a missed opportunities as well to build on those activities, to invest in arts and culture in downtown Kitchener, and obviously to grow the audience and to diversify the audience. Some of the recommendations we can't implement because we don't have space. We'd have to be able to say, okay, let's stop doing this in order to do that. All of that is doable. It's just that we think more performance space and more rehearsal space is something that is worthwhile. The next steps is really for council to consider the comments with respect to the strategic refresh, and that I think is also reflected in staff recommendation to consider the reports as they prepare a broader policy, to await the direction from council. It's your building, it's not our building. We have a management agreement related to the building, but ultimately it's what is in the best interest of the municipality and the residents. And ensure that the next steps related to the theatre, I think, are aligned with the policy initiatives that are in place or being considered as part of Make It Kitchener and other public policy. Decisions on how to move forward, I think, should be done in a strategic manner. Again, we think the investment is appropriate for the Registry Theatre, but we need to look at it, is that the most appropriate use of the funds and other resources that would be made, and also the process to move forward on doing so. Those are my comments with respect to the report. My understanding of the recommendation from staff is that council sort of receive this report and then take into consideration for staff to take into consideration for the next steps going forward. So if there's any questions, I'm very pleased to been able to present what I think is a very positive strategic refresh.
Thank you kindly for your presentation. There are some questions, and then we'll get into questions of staff afterwards. I have 5 people in the queue. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey, and thanks, Don, for coming in. And so, I always appreciate your efforts and what JM Drama does. I think it does really great work. One of the questions in the report, it stated that there was about 200 plus events that could have been taking place, but in your slide it says 150. So, how did the organization measure those statistics?
I could perhaps ask Sam to answer that question. I was using a dated number, so that was my error.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. It's not an exact science, but I have been keeping a list over the last 6 months of everybody who calls and asks for dates. In addition to any organizations, artists that contact us with an opportunity to present something that we're interested in but just can't make it work as a result of lack of availability. Some groups are just interested in one night, some groups are interested in a 2 or a 3 week stretch. So using those numbers over the last 5 or 6 months, it was sort of used to make the projection.
Okay, so that's better than what I thought. I thought it was the year. That's really impressive, actually, if it's just half a year. Because I think somewhere, that maybe the organizations in the community, knowing that the place is busy and booked all the time, do you think that there's probably it could have been a higher number because they just don't bother because they know you're already booked?
Absolutely. One of the recommendations in ArtsBuild's report was a more clear policy on rentals booking, which we have been quietly trying to do as we try to accommodate the more than twice the number of requests than we were able to accommodate. And so an informal waiting list procedure has evolved out of that. But I have heard back from several renters because people need to get to me by January or February, or it's gone. So I hear from a lot of people, I didn't get to you till April, so I just didn't even bother. So yeah, absolutely. I think there's people we don't hear from just because they know from experience that if they don't talk to me by a certain date, that their chances are very slim.
Okay. And so, again, stating through your presentation, Don, for the organization as a whole, you guys are more or less neutral on where, let's say, the city was to invest in, let's say, in the current location or in another location. That's your stance, is neutral?
There are certainly some changes that ought to be done to the building that we would like to see. For example, the ability to move the piano in a safe fashion, but that's not a huge expense, and that could be accommodated, I think, within budgets, etc. Would we like the money invested in the Registry Theatre? Of course. But we recognize that what needs to be done is to look at this from a strategic point of view as to what is the best use of a dollar. And if that's at the Registry Theatre, more than willing to take it and to help fundraise and to do the applications with the various senior levels of government, etc. But ultimately, this is a question of public policy. What is the best use of the funds to deliver on what is needed to allow the sector to grow even more? So long-winded, yes, neutral, but tending towards something at the Registry Theatre.
Okay. Thank you for your questions, and Chair Davey, when the time's appropriate, I'm prepared to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks, Don. Certainly the Registry Theatre is really a wonderful spot in our city, and I think that I've attended so many events there, and I really like the work that happens, the feeling within that theatre with the audience and whatever performers happening. In your report, in the report from ArtsBuild, on 3-43, you list performance-based recommendations, and in the longer term, you're talking about the City of Kitchener's role related to the Centre in the Square and the Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony. Did you read the report that was brought to Council about the relationship between the Kitchener Symphony and the Centre in the Square, yes, and all? So you're aware of all of that?
I'm aware of it. I observed it. I listened to the council meetings, attended as an audience member on occasion, and certainly as we prepared all of this, we've also looked at Make It Kitchener and some of the other public policy issues that have come from council.
Okay, good. I just, because some of my questions may go back to that documentation. The other thing I wonder is, have you spoken with the courtyard?
No, I have not. Personally,
Okay.
I haven't, no.
Okay. And did your consultant in Artsville talk to them about space and what they're doing there?
Not to my knowledge, but she would have, I'm not aware of whether she did or didn't.
Okay, all right. I'm kind of wondering why not. I mean, they're also doing performing arts and have rental space. And because I think it's important for us to take a look at all facets. Not that I disagree with doing some improvements to the registry. I definitely understand where the need is, but I think we need to look at a more global kind of
Councillor
aspect.
Fernandez, questions? We're getting
That is my
comments.
question. I'm asking if we should be looking at a more global aspect to this than
Coun-
just.
That Councillor, that has been one of the fundamental principles that we've had right from the day one, is that a strategic refresh needs to look at what the options are. Ms. Golds may have looked at the courtyard, may have attempted. There were a number of people that she tried to reach, to have discussions with, who didn't respond. And because we were cheap, we were only willing to pay her so much time. And as a result, it may have been a situation where she tried to, but the other part of it is time. We wanted the report to be done in January, draft, so that it could be finalized in February. So again, she may very well have. Conceptually, should these things be looked at? By all means, fully support that.
Awesome. My last question to you is, and just to make sure that you understand that I think that there's opportunity across the city for us to equalize our financial contributions. When you say looking in a strategic manner, can you sort of be a little, I mean, strategic planning, and we hear those buzzwords all the time. Mm-hmm. Is there something specifically that you think, because I mean, I read your report and the report was very detailed and I appreciate that, but is there some specific strategic measures that you want, or use another word, for example, that you wanted to, is it the space, the rehearsal space? Is it the change room areas?
But certainly to me, from you look at strategic objectives, you look at from the organization and the building, and those strategic objectives are going to be different than if you step back and say, what is the strategic objective for the council, for the City of Kitchener, and for Make It Kitchener and economic development, etc. So from a strategic objective for the theatre, creating a rehearsal space in the basement and the addition is of strategic importance. Is it of sufficient, because we don't own the building, and nor do we have the cash to do that? Can the strategic objectives of creating more rehearsal space be achieved, and more performance space be achieved by using those funds in a different fashion? So looking to us, having change rooms that are appropriate for our customers is something that's important. Could that be achieved without the addition being put on the building and other expenses? Yes. Could the piano issue and some of the other backstage issues be dealt with without the addition? Yes, not as easily, but could they be dealt with? We think they can be at a lower cost. Now, I don't want to undercut my own arguments around this from the theater's perspective, but from the strategic perspective of economic development, social development, recreational development of facilities, etc., should there be investment in this area that creates more performance space and more rehearsal space? Yes. Is that money best invested in the Registry Theatre as opposed to some other buildings in the downtown core or adjacent area? Those are decisions that we're not competent to make. I could say, put the money in the Registry Theatre, but that's, I obviously have an interest in that particular building. We think that's the role of council.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your answers.
Councillor Neski?
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation, and I want to congratulate you and JM Drama on the success of all the programming that you've been doing over the while, and having a waiting list of people wanting to come and ever to be participating in that, and that's good news. And I can certainly appreciate where you're coming from in terms of wanting to move forward on this. And that's quite evidently shown in your report that you submitted that talks about the expansion through the Walter Fady request to do this. Following up on Councillor Fernandez's comments, then I would gather that your most strategic objective would be an expansion that answers all those little comments in terms of space, availability, easiness in terms of making it move forward. Would that be the main goal in terms of your strategic objective?
If we were looking only at the Registry Theatre in isolation of all the other buildings, that investment would achieve the strategic objectives of creating a rehearsal space, redoing the office area, creating appropriate change rooms, etc. But keep in mind, we have been investing our own money and Trillium money over the last 10 years for wheelchair accessible washrooms and washroom, etc. But would we, if the sole question was, Don, we've got X amount of dollars to spend on the Registry Theatre, here it is, how would you spend the money to achieve the strategic objectives, to accomplish these things? I would say, by all means, let's invest that money. And that would achieve the strategic objectives. We can only build on the back of the building so far. And so would I knock down the jail in order to expand backward? Yeah, but no one would ever give permission to do that. Would I incorporate the courtyard into another performance venue? Yeah, but the region's not going to allow that. So from a reality point of view, the Walter Fady proposal, we think, is a reasonable one, reasonably priced within the nature of these sorts of things. Although the full costing of HVAC and so forth has to be dealt with from the building audit point of view, that hasn't been factored in. So is it a good use of money? In my opinion, yes. Is it the best use of money? That's something I can't judge because I don't know the cost of others and so forth.
And I appreciate that, and I know throwing the ball back into our court to make that decision in comparison to other venues, that's something that we would have to consider. Just a short question. The piano that you have, is that a grand piano or an upright?
It's a grand. I can never remember. I think it's Yamaha. It's a $30,000 piano.
So that's a challenge in getting it to stand upright every time just for space needs, isn't it?
That's right. We have to put it's stored on its side and can only be moved on its side, which means at some point we will have $30,000 of firewood because if it falls, the board will be cracked, and once the soundboard is cracked, it's toast. That, from an immediacy, is probably the first thing we would do, regardless, is try and deal with that and provide a better storage so that it can be stored flat and moved flat.
Okay, and that's the way you should be moved, basically. I do agree with you. I'm just going to jump ahead in terms of thinking ahead, in terms of assuming everything falls into place in terms of, okay, let's do the expansion for the Registry Theatre. And having read the variety of improvements that need to take place, and there's quite a few, because the building was built as a registry theatre for government purposes as opposed to a drama arts theatre. If this goes ahead, what happens in terms of the productions that we have? Are you sort of not doing any theatre productions for a year or a half year, or what happens there?
No, I think that's a very good question, and I think that is something that needs to be factored in. So we have not done sort of project management. We would want to obviously keep the building as open as possible. There are cost implications of that. So do we do most of the work in July and August and then have other stuff? I mean, the primary focus is to keep the stage alive, and then you can downstairs do stuff. So we might not have daytime programming so the construction could occur. We have not gone down that path other than conceptually to recognize that if there's construction at the building, there's going to be an impact on the performances. But that's the same thing. We're looking at a change to our house, renovation to our house. It means we're going to be without a bathroom for a few days. I mean, you have to accommodate those things.
Yeah. Okay, I do have further questions, but I guess my time is up, so.
Yes, and actually on that, we still have 4 people in the queue, and then presumably some questions of staff, and we're approaching our 45-minute time for this, so I would ask all members to please try and be succinct in your question. Mayor Verbenovich.
Thank you very much. And Don, let me begin by thanking you and the entire group at JM for the great job you continue to do with registry and arts and culture in our community. I guess a couple quick questions. First of all, in sort of looking at the different venues, did Victoria Park Pavilion come up at all?
It did not, to the best of my knowledge, and I think there are a number of issues with Victoria Park that we used to do performances there, and it is a potentially nice venue for performances, but it was not specifically looked at to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. On the issue of where the right place is to invest new dollars, whether it's in an expansion of this facility or somewhere else, I guess the one thing I just want to be absolutely clear on, though, it's not replacing registry with something else. It's we need additional space because there's demand for additional space, and by expanding, what you would be able to do is free up some rehearsal space off the main stage into a secondary space, and then do your main shows still upstairs.
Correct. Well, in fact, right now it's not even replacement. We have to use, and thankfully, Kitchener Public Library has been very good to us over the last little while, but our rehearsal for this spring show is being done at the Kitchener Public Library in one of the meeting rooms downstairs. That's a good interim thing, but it's not a long-term thing. So we would free up space so that there would be a rehearsal hall downstairs that could be used while performances are occurring upstairs. There's still going to be need for other rehearsal spaces because we still won't be able to accommodate all the rehearsals that are necessary, not just for our productions. I mean, we do 2 shows a year from that perspective. It's all those other Lost and Found and Greenlight Arts and a variety of other companies that we want to grow as well. So there is still a need for rehearsal space somewhere else.
Okay. On the issue of affordability, I mean, the report talks about sort of the prices that you charge at the registry and so on. Is it your sense that that's sort of the general price range that's most viable for groups? I mean, is there some elasticity there?
There is some elasticity, both on the HST issue, because that will increase, but what we found is most of our users are HST registered, so it's just a flow through for them. Most of the users said that they could afford to pay more. Now, none of them offered that up until they were asked, but they could. We couldn't double our amount, but there is some elasticity, and we have a proposal right now. I think it's about a $50 per day increase, and we think that's within the comfort range for groups. Part of the overall is what should the price be, and that where those individual organizations are not able to afford, we will be flexible with them.
But the fact that you don't have some of the fixed costs, for example, that they have, or staffing costs rather, that are associated with the rental that exists at the center or at Conrad, that's really where the saving grace is.
Oh, our costs, I mean, it varies from a third to a tenth of what the others are because of the additional cost. We give you the key. And by the way, we have not had a problem giving the key out to people. We've in fact inherited more leftover equipment than we've lost, right? It's security is important, but we're dealing with people that we have developed a trust relationship with. And so they respect the property as well as the equipment.
It sounds like back in the old St. Jerome's High School days.
Yeah.
The last question I had is, in terms of the staff recommendation to refer this, is that sort of where you were expecting things to go today?
Yeah, I think that is entirely appropriate because we want to make sure the community is served in an efficient and effective way. and to grow things. Otherwise, I'm not here to say, give me the money now. It's rather, let's do this in a thoughtful, comprehensive approach.
Okay, thank you, Don.
Although you can give me the money now if you so desire.
Councillor Schneider?
Thank you, Chair Davey. Don, thank you so much for coming in and for this report. One of the things that you're asking the city to look into is the possibility of an inventory of what potential rehearsal spaces we might have to share. What is it that you need in a rehearsal space?
It will vary depending upon about the organization, but one of the things is sort of a permanence, right? In the sense that I'm going to rehearse there for all the rehearsals. And so if you're dealing with not so much concerts, not so much that, but rather live theater, drama, comedies, musical theater, etc., performers have to get accustomed with the stage. And so, we rehearsed at the Clock Tower for The Odd Couple, but that Clock Tower boardroom was about a third of the size of the stage. And so if you don't rehearse on a comparable size stage, all of your actions, how you maneuver on the stage, how you rehearse, gets screwed up. It's not the end of the earth. But for performers, you need to get accustomed to a particular space. How close are you to the door, etc. So the space needs to be an area that replicates or close to replicates what the stage is going to be without pillars, etc. That's one of the problems in the library. And I'm not complaining about the library. They've been very good to us. But there's a pillar. And yesterday I was at rehearsal and somebody walked into the pillar because they forgot that it was there. But it's also that permanence in the sense that you don't have to bring things. So it's not, let's use the church basement tonight and we're going to use this place tomorrow night, etc. It's a place that you can also keep your stuff because you have the Sunday afternoon rehearsal, the Wednesday night rehearsal, etc. You want to be able to not waste an hour setting up and then another hour taking down. So those are some of the elements. And obviously, of course, with washrooms and occupational health and safety types of issues. That permanence and the knowledge that this is a regular thing, that this is where we're going to go to rehearse.
Okay, and off the top of your head, are there any spaces that you might see the city having as potential places for rehearsal spaces?
Well, I think there's some. I mean, Gaukel Street was potential, 44 Gaukel, because there is the space. And in fact, JM Drama at various times has used that building for set construction and a variety of other things over the years, as did the high schools. We're looking at what can the Royal Canadian Legion building be used for. I had been in that space before, or a few years ago. Is that something that is feasible? There are others as well. The studio. The studio has its own complications, but the studio at Centre in the Square is a nice large space without pillars. There's some issues around it from a performance point of view, but from a rehearsal point of view, there's potential there. The issue, though, is access to the studio from a cost. It's cost prohibitive. So those are some of the potential examples. There's also some private sector areas. The issue with the private sector, though, is we will let you use the rehearsal until we find a tenant to occupy the space. So there's the building at, I think it's 100 Aarons Street that's being renovated, and there's a large space that could be a useful one, but that's only going to be there until the coffee shop moves in. Right? So there's some private sector, and that's where, when we look to the city, it's because the city has a different dynamic related to these things than does the private sector. And I'm not critical of the private sector, but the city looks at it in generation time, not in a year or two.
Okay. Thanks. I just want to say that I'm very impressed. You're very good stewards of the funds you receive and some of the creative ways that you find rehearsal space. I was able to have a meeting with Sam and Mary Chevreau at the library, and you received rehearsal space, and JM alumni did a great reading of actors and characters of Charlotte's Web for the library. So it's that sort of partnership that's really encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Dawn, for coming in and sharing your perspective. I did notice that this report that was presented to us is it's your third-party report, and just want to ask you: has your board already deliberated on the recommendations that are relevant to you? And so, has your board decided that you're open to all of the recommendations?
Yep.
Okay, great. And now, regarding any urgent matters, so is the piano really the main urgent matter
I think
over the next 12 months?
Yeah, Alan Hoke's getting to be really old and decrepit.
Yeah.
And it's about time that he doesn't have to hold the piano up with his shoulder.
Well, also piano tuning must be an issue each time you put it down and up. And
yeah, it's $120 each time.
You could save on those costs,
That's
when
right.
you.
That's right.
So I would encourage you to, while our staff need to take their time in developing a strategy relevant to this recommendation, it would be great to see if you have an interim solution that would be compatible with the longer term solution, to bring it forward, because let's get that piano resting and give Alan a break.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
I have questions of staff, but I have one or two also for the delegate, if I could.
Please.
To whom does JM Drama answer to?
Well, it's with any charity, it's a convoluted question. We think we answer to the public that we serve, and the membership base is not a large membership base, as with many charities. It's those people who have a passion for it, and so we do report to our members, and we had an annual general meeting just the other day, but the people who showed up at the annual general meeting were those who were, actively involved. We also report annually to Canada Revenue Agency, with the charity information return. And we do report on our use of the facility to the City of Kitchener, because that's a management agreement, and it's not a lease agreement, but a license agreement for us to occupy the space. We look at it as well as though that a charity needs to be resilient, and it needs to be responsive to the changing needs of the community that it serves. And so the Strategic Refresh Report was our attempt to see if we were doing that. I don't know if that answers the question.
That answers the question. The reason to really ask the question was that you're there because of what you and a number of other volunteers think of arts and culture, and you're really doing it out of the goodness of your heart. So that's all the point I wanted to make. There's been a great deal said about these 150 to 200 turnaways. Were those turnaways due to availability, or were they due to timing not being right, or were they due to cost? What's the other part of that story?
I'll ask Sam to correct me on this, but the time just wasn't available. Sam?
Basically there's two really popular bits of real estate when it comes to the presenting year, and that's from October through until the first couple of weeks of December, and then again in March through until the end of May. Those are really the spots when we have a lot of requests. But we also have groups, Greenlight Arts, for example, a local group that's just started up, that really wants to take 3 weeks to properly rehearse and present a show. And there's just no way to accommodate that amount of time. So in some cases I'm coming back and saying, I could find a week for you, but not 3. And so that doesn't really fit their vision for the project. And at this point, there's no other space locally where they can do what they're interested in doing for the sorts of budget that they have to work with.
Do we have any idea what happened to all those turnaways? You state that we've lost $40,000 in revenue, but that's not really the case. We wouldn't have. We wouldn't have. If we'd have had the space, it would have cost us $50 to pay for the space. But do you know what happened to the groups that got turned away?
A mixed bag. Some of them don't end up doing the project at all. One group found space at a local high school. Some do end up going to the Conrad Center. And others sort of find other solutions with community centers or other facilities. But we consistently hear back that their preference is the registry, and without fail, they let me know that The other spaces just don't end up working as well, and that they would love to be with us if it's possible.
Going down the road, I think we're probably looking at a $1 million renovation. In the past, JM Drama on their own have done a lot of work to contribute to that sort of thing. If that's the route we go, what are the feelings of your organization? How much are they willing to step up to the plate over and above what they're already doing?
I think we're a small organization, and so we could not raise that amount of money on our own. I think that's the reality of it. But we certainly can do the applications and participate, and I think if council goes this route, or a mix of routes around this, is we would work with city staff and with others in order to raise those funds. But it's not a situation where none of us have the ability to write that sort of check. Would we participate in raising those funds? By all means. I don't think, however, we want to go through a situation where we're on the hook for the loan, which was when we did this building originally, we were on the hook for a $150,000 loan in order to do the renovation. We came up with $75,000. Actually, we were on the hook for $225,000. We came up with $150,000, but there was $75,000 that we just could not raise. And Councillor Gazzola, you were the one that moved at the time that the city waived that remaining amount. We had repaid $75, $150. I don't think we're in the position now to be able to do that sort of situation. In your youth, you take on risks that you might not in your older ages.
Thank you. Thank you. I just have one little quick comment I have questions of staff, but one of the points you made, which is such an important point, I wish we would really do it with other things, is that you trust people, giving them the key. Yeah. When you trust people, giving them the key, the cost to our society is a lot less because we don't have to have peer. And I imagine a lot of the places that are available for use, there are those things that got to have an attendant, we got to have somebody to clean up, even though organizations like yourself and others would leave it cleaner than when they stepped into it. Yep. So it's a really important point.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. My question, we have one more in the queue, Mr. Bourgeois, but I really appreciate the report. I thought there's a lot of information here, especially from ArtsBuild. But the one area that I still am struggling with is the cost versus the availability of the space. So, and this hasn't really cleared it up. So my sense is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, it isn't that there isn't necessarily enough space out there. It's that situations like the Centre and the Square Studio space have priced themselves out of the market. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I mean, because of the cost structure that exists there, there's an ability to increase what we charge by $50 a night over time, for this September. There is other space. Some of it, though, is not readily available, such as the studio, Conrad Center, etc. So there is a cost structure that is misaligned with what we charge. May be perfectly reasonable for them to charge that, but from a user's point of view, it doesn't really matter, right? If they can't afford this and there's no space at the Registry Theatre, they either don't do it or they try and struggle and afford it. I can't. I mean, as well as a small organization, we have not gone into in-depth analyses. You know, there's not Excel spreadsheets out there for us. The 40,000 was of lost revenue to us if we were able to have rented that space. That's an estimate based upon the numbers that we saw. So it's not a hard number that would go through a business, an MBA test on it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fernandez, questions of the delegation or?
So one sort of more hypothetical question, Don. If you were aware that there were funds available but were actually going to go somewhere else, but that could be used to do what needs to be done with the space that Registry has really been providing a wonderful opportunity for all kinds of people in the arts, What would your concern or your comments be about that?
If there were monies to go to the Project X over here and those funds became available to use at the Registry Theatre, I would obviously say, okay, go for it, but I'd like to know what Project X was, because, you know, I'm a resident of the community. I want to see a balanced approach to community development, to economic development, and it's not always me, 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 me. It is, and my wife will tell you that it's always me, me, me. But I think as a society, we have to look at these things and say, over a period of time, what is the right balance of investments in different sectors? So if you were to say to me that Project X is dealing with abject poverty or something or other, I'd have a hard time saying, yeah, let's put an addition to the building and forget about the people who have no house. There needs to be the balance from that perspective. And that's not something a community group can make a decision on. That's, sorry to say, that's council's decision. Would I take the money and run, as Woody Allen says? Sure. But I'm also a resident of the community. I want to make sure we have a vibrant, well thought out, well implemented public policy that helps all the residents of the city.
Well, thank you. You're certainly being very, very generous in your comments, Don, because I think what I'm alluding to is more than, abject poverty, but, if there was space that could be renovated, or is there's funding for that or the registry, which is an existing, already viable and doing wonderful work. So, but I think you've answered. I don't want to belabor the point. I think you answered the question. I appreciate your response. I do have an amendment to the motion once we get to that point. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, there are no further questions, Don. Thank you very kindly for your presentation. I want to say, too, I really appreciate the fact that you came and pled the case for the institution you're related to, but I think it means so much more when you're actually speaking for the broader community and recognizing the fact that we need to have a balance in terms of what we do. So thank you kindly.
Thank you.
Okay, questions of staff. Before we get to the actual questions, did staff want to make any initial comments first?
Thank you, through the chair. We also appreciate a lot of the hard work that's gone into the strategic refresh, and are prepared to answer any questions. I think Don has covered it very well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
I just have a couple of little questions. The recommendation talks about a 2016 Kitchener Arts Action Plan. Now, is it okay for me to say what is that?
Right.
I looked up our website, and I saw the 1996 Culture Plan and the Downtown Kitchener Action Plan for 2012 to 2016. So what is that we're recommending here?
Through the chair, as a subset to make a Kitchener economic development strategy, we're doing the Arts Action Plan, as well as an update to what would be recalled as Culture Plan 1 and 2. And I believe it is in our business plan to proceed. And we've started this year working with engaging the advisory committees, and then working towards a fairly action-oriented strategy coming up before the end of 2016 or the fall of this year.
So it's another study. Okay, that's we're referring to that in our recommendation. The only other question I have is that I've never remembered ever seeing any financial statements or information about the Registry Theatre. Does anyone ever report to council on that, or I've never?
We've done updates. Through the chair, I think we've done, the registry's done updates in the past, but I'll ask Don if...
Mr. Bourgeois?
We used to do to one of the committees, I think Community Services Committee, an annual report. That sort of died out, but in November, or whenever the council dealt with this issue before, we did include our annual report at that time. From a city point of view, I believe there is, as part of the budget process, around $10,000 or $12,000 that is allocated on an annual basis in the budget. That we don't control that. That's the city part of the city budget process to ensure HVAC systems work properly and similar things. But from our point of view, by all means, if you want to see the audited financial statements, I can make those available. The last time we were here, those were part of the report.
You know, I have no concerns. I just that I don't ever remember really seeing anything about the Registry Theatre, and I don't have any concerns with it, but it would be nice to see some kind of annual reporting on those operations. Like when you were talking today as to what you need, it would have been nice to have seen, you know, what's happened and what are we missing, because, and what would a few more dollars mean and all that. So, thank you.
Okay, there's no further, Councillor Yaneski?
Yeah, I thought there probably were other people there. I was collecting my thoughts here. The word budget came out just a few seconds ago. In this, I would gather, and I just don't recall, help me, correct me, is there anything included in terms of the Registry Theatre, in terms of an expansion ever thought of through discussions that staff may have had with them over the last little while that maybe is set aside for years from now?
Through the chair, aside from the exploration within this study, I don't know if there's been other conversations around the building.
So the answer is no.
Looks like not, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I don't have any further questions as well, thank you. So, Councillor Ioannidis, do you want to cue in?
Thanks, Chair Davey. Just one of the quick comments I wanted to make is that, you know, being on council, like the single most handily question that comes up from the arts community and people from the public is affordable performance space and a place for the arts community to gather and collaborate, which is, I just can't quantify how many times I hear that. And in addition, it's always been a request to the city that we support such initiatives. So, and you know, when you have reports such as our SITS report that we did, and the web report, and then you have the Arts Build report, and you know, these are all from third-party organizations as well. It's pretty significant that there is a need there, and so this is why I'm happy to see that this is it was put in forth at least to look at the greater context.
And you're moving the recommendation as written? Yes. Okay. And Councillor, I'm going to go right back to Councillor Fernandez for the amendments so we can get all the discussion out of the way at once. Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah. In light of what was presented to us today, I think what's really important is for us to recognize that we have an existing facility that does fantastic work and has turned away business. So my amendment would be that not only do we consider the findings of the Arts Build, of the third-party consultation, but that we focus our future funding from the arts on the Registry Theatre as identified in the report on page 3-2, one being the renovation of the Registry Theatre resulting in additional rehearsal space and storage space, and two, the identification and development of viable rehearsal performance space. So I think we've already got something going fantastic here. Why don't we start putting our money to that and make sure that we make that better before we even start looking at other ways of, I mean, I know Mr. Bourgeois mentioned Gaukel Street and he mentioned the Legion, but before we start doing that, I think he's correct in saying let's do what we can here first and before we go. I mean, my question to him allowed him to be a little bit more magnanimous than if I had been a little bit more specific, but I think that's what my amendment is.
Okay, I'm not quite sure I understand the intent. Would you mind writing that out?
I have written it out, but I don't know how clear it will be, but
Okay.
certainly the clerk can put it on the
Okay,
screen.
in the meantime, we'll get through the comments here if you would want to edit it.
Yep.
Mayor Vabenovich?
Thanks, Colin.
Well, thank you. And I think if I understand the intent of the motion, what it's doing is trying to, it seems, preempt what the exact motion is that's being moved right now. So the original motion, as I understood it, was to refer it to staff and be part of a broader process looking at a variety of things. This is saying that, in fact, any funding should be focused on the Registry Theatre. And what I believe I heard from Mr. Bourgeois when I asked the question is of the motion in the staff report was that they were in fact satisfied with that motion, that they believed it needed to be considered in the broader context, and that staff needs to look at all of the options and all of the various pieces before they bring a recommendation to council on how dollars should be best spent. So I would have a hard time supporting this amendment today, because I think it's going a step. It's really taking a leap before we take a step. And I think it's important that we follow through on this process comprehensively. It is consistent with what the organization expected, and I fully expect in doing that part of what's going to be looked at is exactly what's being suggested here in a very serious way. I've been a long-time supporter of the Registry Theatre around this horseshoe, and will continue to be going forward. But I think we need to look at next steps in a comprehensive way, because that's where we're at right now as a community, and would urge that we stay focused on the main motion that's before us.
Councillor Schneider?
Thank you, Chair Davey. When it comes to this venue or any, the cost of rehearsal space, the cost of renting the venue space, the cost of the stage crew, the front of house staff, the ticket service charges, these all affect the ticket price, and it affects the affordability of our citizens to come and attend and enjoy the arts. So I am in favor of this report as it stands, to explore and discuss all the issues that were brought up in the report, so that we can optimize everything to the highest effect to bring these costs down and get as much rehearsal space and performance spaces that are affordable, like the Registry, as possible. Thank you.
Councillor Marsh?
Thank you, Chair Davey. I agree with the Mayor and Councillor Schneider. I mean, I understand that perhaps the intent of this amendment would be to provide a vote of confidence in JM Drama, and by voting down, by voting against this amendment, I'm not by any means intending to send a message counter to that. I fully and wholeheartedly support JM Drama and all that they do, and I think $1 million renovation for a basement rehearsal space. We can dress up basements, that we can do our best, but it would be a basement rehearsal space, and not necessarily something that could be used for other things as well. I think we need to explore our options and let staff do their job to look at whether or not that's the right way to go, and so I will be supporting the main motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll comment as well. I find it interesting that the delegation, who isn't even a member of this council, was very clear in indicating that council needs to look at this in the broad context of what's best for the performing arts community. And the amendment is quite contrary of that. It's the exact opposite, actually. It's saying, focus the funding on this. So I certainly cannot support the amendment. The only other comment I want to make is, at this point, like Councillor Anitis, I've heard several times about the lack of performing arts space and its affordability, and I still, on a go-forward basis, as a note to staff, I need to be convinced that we've done everything we can to maximize the affordability of the space that we have, and we manage that to the best of our ability before we look at possibly adding additional space wherever it may be. Two people have jumped up in the queue here. Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, I didn't mean to jump up. I just was surprised that there weren't more comments. I will be supporting the recommendation that's before us. I mean, the recommendation before us really passes it along to our staff to look into it further when they're working on their 2016 Kitchener Arts Plan. So, and I'm very supportive of what these organizations, both JM Drama and the Registry Theatre people, have done in the past with very few dollars from the city. It's a message, message there that was questioning whether it's me all the time. There is a certain group in our community that it is me all the time, but it's not this group. So I'm not only supportive of today's recommendation, but also where they're going down the road. I can't support the amendment because really the amendment almost puts an answer to the question before we even put the question on the table. So we should have, and I'd ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote's been called for. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And very quickly, I wasn't planning on speaking, but I think the report itself is very clear and the recommendation is broad form. But some comments that you made really highlighted a concern for me as well, and a level of dissatisfaction with the reality that there are rehearsal and studio spaces available in the community, but some of those options are so cost prohibitive. And it's even more unfortunate when some of those opportunities and places are within the control of the city or through its arm's length organization or broader organizations like CITS and the studio space. More than anything, I think we need to continue working for ways to ensure spaces like that are more easily available to the broad community at a much lesser cost.
Councillor Yaneski.
I will be supporting the recommendation here because I think it's a good step forward. The presentation by Mr. Bourgeois and the material that he's presented was excellent. It shows the good direction that they want to move forward on, and although they're looking and presented that they want to look at the overall picture that the city needs to do, and I can appreciate where he's coming from on that basis. And I know there's a couple of venues that haven't been considered, like the Courtyard was an example that needs to be expanded and looked at as well. Councillor Fernandez's amendment, I think, is an excellent amendment. However, we still have to look at the whole picture because her amendment deals directly with what the JM Drama wants to move is basically look for an expansion on their own premises as opposed to going elsewhere. They're there right now and they want to move forward in their own location. Locating at another location means now you've got two sites to work with, and some of those groups may want that, but that may make it a little difficult. So I see where she's coming from, but I also see the context where we still have to look at the big picture overall as well.
Okay, Councillor Fernandez, you've already commented on this when you moved your amendment. I have you in the queue again.
Don't I get a wrap-up comment before we make the vote?
You already commented, was my point.
Fine.
Okay, if you want to speak briefly, you can. Please keep it brief.
Really, my amendment is intended to support the JM Drama and the Registry Theatre because I think what they've identified two very critical pieces, the piano storage and the changing rooms. And I thought that if I ask for some focus on what they need already, instead of looking for other places, which we know the city has been looking at, that's why I'm asking for this focus.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to say that I support, I haven't said anything, so I felt I probably should say something. Very much supportive of the Registry Theatre, what they do, what JM Drama does. I do think there's some immediate needs that we can look at outside of the greater context of moving forward strategically from a city perspective, but I do think we need to look at it holistically and move forward with the staff recommendation. that we consider the findings of the request and the reports, and I think in the fullness of time we'll see what the best direction forward is for the community. But I think again this report shows us that in our community we need more space, period, and I think it's important that we keep seeing that and hearing that, and that we work towards a solution to remedy that situation. It could be at the registry, it could be at the registry and somewhere else, because there is enough need in our community to not only support, continue to support what the registry is doing, but also find other spaces to help the arts community flourish in Kitchener.
Okay, thank you. With that, we will take the vote. We will first be voting on the amendment by Councillor Fernandez, and a recorded vote has been asked for. Those in favor? And opposed? The motion fails, and we will now vote on the original motion. And that carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to item number 4, the Museum Makerspace. I understand staff will have a brief presentation on this.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of Council. We're pleased to introduce the underground studio project in the museum as outlined in our Make It Kitchener project schedule. We are recommending a capital investment of $50,000 from the Economic Development Reserve for capital and leasehold improvements. These funds would be used to convert currently underutilized space in the basement of the museum into makerspace for children and youth ages 5 to 17 in order to give them the opportunity to work with tools and create things. The workforce of the future will need to be able to create with their hands and their minds, and this community is uniquely equipped to be able to provide our young people with the opportunity to develop these skills at an early age. We have the ideal facility, conveniently located downtown near the transit hub, the training expertise, and the support of the corporate community to be able to deliver this experience. Organizations and corporate sponsors such as the Lyle Hallman Foundation, the Kitchener and Waterloo Community Foundation Music Eddies Fund, Google and Christie Digital have combined to contribute $117,500 in capital and operational funding. The project also ties in directly with the creation of a continuum of makerspaces, in this case, the Make It Spark pillar of the city's new economic development strategy, Make It Kitchener. The supervised programs offered at the underground studio will provide training in the handling and safe operation of tools and equipment that will allow participants to pursue projects at home or at other unsupervised makerspaces available within the community. One of the principal challenges facing the local economy is the difficulty in acquiring the skilled workforce needed today and for future growth. This is particularly evident in the area of advanced manufacturing. Results from an Employer One survey funded by the province and administered by workforce planning boards across the province provides information on predicted hiring by local employers. The local survey covered Waterloo, Wellington, and Dufferin. However, 50% of the respondents were from the City of Kitchener. Some of the key stats as they relate to manufacturing are 21% of the total respondents were from the manufacturing sector, by far the highest percentage, and 51% of all forecasted hiring is within the manufacturing sector. 76% of respondents indicated that they plan to hire over the next 12 months. The top reasons quoted for jobs being hard to fill were not enough applicants at 61% and no applicants at 15%. These results indicate that hiring challenges continue for local manufacturers in both the quantity and quality of applicants available. From an economic development perspective, it's important that we not only work to address local workforce needs today, but invest in developing the workforce our community will need in the next decade in order to ensure that our employers can thrive and grow without being constrained by a mismatch of the skills available and the skills required. Without proactive action, these challenges will continue into the future and curtail the growth potential of local manufacturing, a key component in our local economy. I'm not sure if any of you caught it this morning. However, Canada AM, as part of their Made in Canada series, featured ClearPath Robotics. In this excellent video, they indicate that they anticipate filling 100 new positions this year and made the point that these are not necessarily engineering-type positions, but will be of interest to a wide range of people interested in making things and working with robots. The proposed underground studio project presents an opportunity to be proactive in addressing our future workforce needs by providing local youth with a chance to experience the maker culture at an early age, thus opening their minds to future career opportunities they might not otherwise consider.
Thank you. And will the delegation be making a presentation as well, or just responding to questions?
I believe they're here to answer any questions that may come up.
It'll be less of a presentation and more of just 5 points.
Okay, very good.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, sir.
My name is Frank Boutzis. I chair the board of directors at the museum, and in my spare time, I'm a partner with KPMG. We also have Mark Darrow here, who is also one of our board members and director of program development and innovation at Conestoga College. And the brains of the delegation here, Laurel McKellar, who is our senior director of program development at the museum. What I wanted to do is just briefly touch on some of the points that Valerie brought up. First of all, the underground studio, as we've developed it, really aligns well with the strategic direction of our board. We've looked at many ways of trying to develop what we do in the community in a sustainable way. And so we've developed 5-pronged strategy, one of which is diversification of revenue, to try and do that. This aligns very well in that way. Number 2, and I think this is and we spent an off-site for 2 days last weekend. And we spent the first day in Toronto going to many maker spaces that they have there. There's some high-end ones, obviously, at Ryerson University, Mars, and things like that. And then there's some other ones, just to get an idea of how they operate, what their revenue models look like, how they really provide what's necessary in the community. So what we did was look at what we've done here, and while we have a maker space now in that we have a wait list. We have people that we are turning away that we cannot actually service in that confined space. We just need that space to be bigger to try and do that. And I think when you look at how well it is supported, and Valerie talked about the support that we've already recovered from all the other organizations in our community, there's obviously not only the demand, but even the support that's necessary. And when you look at what we are doing by introducing very young people into STEM learning, which is the science and the technology and the engineering and the math, I think it's very important. I mean, I recall, and I know you earlier talked about, being in high school. When I was in high school, I would actually do things with my hands, like make a spice rack that I would give to my mom, which would probably fall apart after 3 days. But nonetheless, you could do things with your hands. Kids nowadays obviously don't do that. But the more important thing is that you build that learning and the builder that's in those kids for the long term. And that maker technology that we can bring forward in and develop in those kids, they will be entrepreneurs of the future that will actually know how to make. And I think that really is the life learning that they will get, which will drive economic development in the communities where you do have maker spaces. And lastly, I look at it and the alignment that it currently has with the city's Make It Kitchener strategy totally makes sense, in particular the Make It Spark. I mean, when you look at that, this is what this is about, sparking a learning in that younger population, that younger demographic that might not otherwise be able to do that. So when those are the things that I just wanted to highlight. As I said, it wasn't much of a presentation, but just to highlight some of the points that we looked at as a board. And again, we looked at it as a board and said, okay, if we're going to commit to this, we need to evaluate this from a business lens and try and look at it with a return on investment, if you will, and say, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to provide. Some of it will be immeasurable or intangible in terms of that lifelong learning, but we are looking at and I know that the material contained the calculations, if you will, around the math in terms of the revenue and things like that. So we're trying to get to a place where it becomes absolutely sustainable and, again, drives the longer vision of the museum. So open for questions.
Thank you, Kenny. There are a few people in the queue for questions. First, Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey. And my question could be to Val or to Mr. Boutzis, and thanks, Mr. Boutzis, for coming in. Do you have an idea on the expected amount of children that may go through this, or young students?
Sorry, an idea of?
How many do you expect of children to come through to the facility for this purpose?
May I defer?
Sure.
Laurel? If it gets to operations, she's the brains. If it's the innovation part, that's Mark. I'm an accountant. Hardly that.
I'm not sure if it was included in the operating budget that we supplied. The numbers are based on a number of different admission fees for school groups to attend, for public programs for us to run camps throughout the year. So a number of different venues. To give you a total number of schools, I don't have that information right offhand.
Okay, I mean, that's... I can hear that another time or whenever that's ready, available. I guess my other question is, and just to maybe bring a social economics aspect to the project, is I know children with autism are really good with working with their hands, and a facility like this would be something that would benefit them, and wonder if that would be something that the organization would look at, like maybe partnering with Kids Ability may also be an additional revenue model for you guys as well. Just throwing that out.
Yeah, I mean, I look at that. I mean, certainly that's an opportunity, and if it's going to serve a segment of our community that can actually benefit from that, absolutely. I mean, this is open, it's wide open. I mean, the reality is, I mean, it's not unlike the previous presentation. I mean, if you look at a revenue model that you want to be sustainable or generate some kind of return, you're going to have to price it differently. The reality is we can't limit or confine our attendance in the program based on that kind of model. Otherwise, I mean, you're not going to get the people that really need it or should be there, may not be able to be there. So we're trying to strike the right balance.
Okay, that's good to hear. And Mr. Chair, when it's appropriate, I'm ready to move the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Just as a heads up here as well, we do have 6 people in the queue for questions, plus myself, plus presumably questions of staff afterwards. So please be succinct in your questioning, and you can reserve your comments for comment time, okay? Councillor Marsh.
I was going to move the motion, so I'll just leave it at that.
Oh, very good. Set a good example. Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah. I'm just going to make a comment that I think we have our timer to remind us about being succinct. Have you, when you were talking about this partnership, so my understanding is Tinker Truck is the one who's approached you about doing this programming at the museum. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Will you be engaging any other businesses, maker businesses, to be running the programs, or will it be solely Tinker Truck?
Yeah. You might as well just stay here.
We've been talking with a number of consultants in addition to Tinker Truck. So we look forward to having a maker in residence in the space that would rotate much like an artist in residence at the city would. So that would allow us for the expertise of the maker community to rotate in the space for new programming and bringing people not only from Tinker Truck but from Quartz Lab into the space. We just had a meeting with Lightbot, who is a local company as well. So a number of sources to answer your question.
Okay, so you said you're in consultation, but if we support this right now, the main programmer and the main person who will be doing all of the programs is Tinker Truck.
We are hiring our own coordinator for the space. So Tinker Truck, although they're involved in helping us to open the space, once it's running, we'll be engaging a number of different partners.
Okay. When we had the discussion last week, one of the questions I had asked is this going to be create a competition, or will this undercut some of the programs that are already out there being offered to children from various community groups or organizations? And the answer was yes. Is that correct?
I wouldn't view it like that.
I mean, my view is that it's not the same, one. Two, we already have wait lists and we can't accommodate those that want what we do. So even if there was competition, theoretically, it would absorb that overflow, which it doesn't. So it's not necessarily the same programming, is the way I look at it.
Okay, so I looked at the website from Tinker Truck and what was being offered there, and when I just took a look at our leisure magazine that we put out there was close to a dozen other agencies and our community centers who are offering very similar or exactly the same kind of program that Tinker Truck was offering, including other ones that they weren't offering, like sewing and pottery and multimedia and robotics. How is it that we won't have this particular business not taking away business from our own community centers and Homer Watson House and Gallery and KWAG and the university? I mean, that's my concern here, is that we're going to be taking away business from other entities that help our community and partner with our neighborhood associations.
I think that our space will definitely have equipment and offer program that are guided programming for children of an age in the community that's not currently available. The equipment will be such a unique to the space.
Have you looked at all the programs that were offered in the community by other, like the University of Waterloo and the Button Factory Art Hub? I mean, there's so many other agencies and businesses and groups that are offering and have some of those they have 3D printers, they have multimedia, they have photography, they have clay pottery. I mean, have you looked at what those are offering as well?
Well, keep in mind, I mean, where we're focused is on STEM learning, which is, if you think about that, right? I mean, it's science, so, I mean, you're going to take photography. It doesn't really fit in with engineering or math or technology necessarily. So there's a different focus on this learning being STEM learning.
Well, what about what the high schools are offering? I mean, they offer tech shops and woodworking, and that's all part of the learning there as well.
I'm not sure what the schools have in their curriculum. The reality is this is about creating a learning to make these folks have a life learning that will make them makers and think differently than what they are doing today. I mean, you can make the argument, which I think is where you're going, and I don't want to presuppose that, but if you're going to make the argument that the school should take this on, that's not something that we can do. They haven't. It's no different than should the University of Waterloo take on all the startup programs that Community Tech does. I mean, the reality is we are where we are. We have a great demand for this. We're turning people away, and there's a wait list. So if there's other, and is there some collaborative enterprise that we can engage in to try and see, this is what we do, this is what you do, to try and assimilate that? I think that personally, I think that goes to a broader macro strategy around what arts and culture should be in our community. And we heard that earlier as well. I mean, that's the broader issue. So all I can say is from our lens, we've got support for something that is demanded by the community, and we're trying to serve that.
Okay, just so you be clear, no, I'm not saying that just the schools should be offering that.
Councillor Singh?
Yes, thank you. Just on the last bit of questioning, and I think we have to be fair to the delegation and the recommendation. What you're proposing is, and I'm looking for clarification from the earlier questions, is with the additional funding to be able to have more access to advanced machinery, far more than what's available right now. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
And that's not being done in tandem with just the museum and with partnership with the city, but there are other private entities that are also would be sponsoring this as well. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. So, example was given of multitude of other organizations that, foster the maker culture or learning in circuitry or machine shop in high schools. But from the report and earlier conversations where one of your representatives came and actually met with council members as well to allow us to better understanding, what I got was this is an opportunity where parents can participate. And that's, can you speak to that, what that broad form of learning really helps to foster and early youth?
Sure. Paul, one thing that's really interesting is, and I think in the report, Valerie, it highlights the age. By a certain age, if a young lady hasn't moved into a practical or applied learning environment, the odds of them going into engineering or trades is greatly diminished. It's not just the youth, it's the parent that helps make that decision with the educational process. And so this is a multi-pronged approach that reinforces what's happening in other areas, but also engages the parents along with the children.
So it's not just the child or the youth that's learning, the parent that's participating, they're getting the solder burns on their fingers as well. They're learning also.
Exactly, and part of the other thing that it reinforces is the mentors that are there also become role models, and it looks from the parents' perspective that there's a future and that there's a job opportunity at the end of this. This isn't just tinkering for tinkering's sake. This is part of a whole process that contributes to them making a decision to go into a specific field or a career path.
Good, thank you. Now that I helped you guys to answer some of the earlier questions and elaborate a little bit further, I want to ask a little bit more of a tougher question now of my own. Were any other agencies, government agencies, that were reached out for funding assistance for this, other than the City of Kitchener? The region does fund the museum. Was the region approached as well? Was the region approached for funding also?
In terms of the funding?
Yeah.
If I understand the question, so in terms of what they've provided us, it's more operating than it is capital, right? Like you're talking about the 117?
That's correct, yeah.
Right. So most of that is for operating, right? And it's difficult to ask for capital dollars in a building that, quite honestly, that they don't own. It's like me asking my neighbor to say, help me with my kitchen renovation just because you live next door. That kind of thing. So I think there's a greater challenge in making that argument. However, I mean, they have been, I'm going to say, flexible in terms of, just let us know what you're going to do with the money. If you want to use it for capital, maybe you can carve out a piece of it, but most of it is for operating, to hire that individual, to get the thing going, all that kind of good stuff. Because the space that we have now in the basement, I mean, what it will do is actually create, it will act, the leaseholds that are going to be done with that, with the 50,000, I mean, they're all going to go to capital and all leaseholds.
Okay, good, yeah. Thank you.
Mayor Rabinovich?
Thank you very much, and thanks for all the great work you do. I was impressed again on the weekend with the numbers of people that came out for the launch of the Terry Fox exhibit, and it's a real privilege, I think, for our community to be able to be the first community in Canada to host it. But on this issue, I'm wondering if in particular you can talk about the importance of getting young people involved in this kind of maker environment early on in order to shape their thinking later on, both in terms of the kinds of in terms of their abilities in the sciences and mathematics and so on, as well as the direction they ultimately end up going in terms of college and university and their careers afterwards. Because it's something that was part of our conversations last week in the mayor's mission in California and when we visited a makerspace. And so I'd certainly appreciate either the colleges or the museum's perspective on this.
Again, I just revert back to the report about the age, about the engagement, where decisions are made very early. It's surprising when you think that in high school, the assumption is that by the time they reach grade 11 and 12, they're making a decision about whether they're going to college or university, when in fact it really happens in the grade school, like grade 6, 7, and 8. They can actually, a student can, by virtue of which courses they take and which electives or which specializations they take when they move into high school, they can move away from a trade stream or an engineering stream just by the fact of the math and the communication courses that they're taking. So the earlier you can engage the youth, and specifically there's a gender imbalance with young ladies not going into that area. So if we can get them engaged at an earlier age and get the parents on side and they understand the opportunities and the potential for it, that's where the win-win is. And it's not a single-prong approach. That's the key thing. The more times this message is given, the better opportunity there is. And I don't know about you, but when you're going through a playground, you don't hear the kids playing in the playground and one young lady turning to there say, "I'm going to be a plumber when I grow up." But when in fact, that's a huge opportunity for them. And moving into the trades or moving into an engineering stream is a huge potential.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Davey. Laurel, I was at the same meeting that Councillor Fernandez was at with you. I'm just wondering, could you give us an idea of the demographic breakdown of the people that attend the makerspace? The gender breakdown, sorry. Male, female.
Yes, it's interesting. When in fact, usually you would think that not many are female, but actually we have over 50% of our participants are female, and we have right now more female volunteers acting as mentors to the Maker Club than males.
Okay. And as we strengthen our image as an innovation destination and the innovation corridor between here and Toronto, how would having something like this and the ability to be expanded into the capital upgrades, how do you see that in terms of helping to attract high-end tech talent to this area if their children could use this space?
If I'm understanding the question right, it goes back to building those lifelong makers. So beginning their exposure to these types of programs with guided learning in a space with equipment and having them go through potentially a free program and a class or a workshop, a shorter commitment for their time, and then grow into makers that are utilizing some of the existing spaces in the community on their own, such as the library or Quartz Lab, and then develop careers from that.
Yeah, and I was kind of made me alluding to a little bit of what Cam Turner had said in that meeting, and how, we would have then like a real culture of innovation starting from a very young age that really solidifies our strengths here in the Kitchener. I would like to propose a slight amendment to the recommendation, adding the words in support of capital improvements for the underground studio makerspace at the museum, just to clarify what the recommendation is about, and I have that written out. Thank you.
Thank you. Noted. Councillor Gazzola.
Just a quick question. What will happen down the road here if the council in its wisdom decided not to give you this grant?
What happens? I don't hear well into this. No, seriously. Like,
if the council.
Can you repeat the question, Councilor Grzilla?
The question is, what happens if you don't get this money? Simple question.
Oh, what happens if you don't get the money?
From the city,
We will have to find other sources, like we will, but it's going to be very difficult and it'll defer the program. I mean, the reality is, because it's capital, it's not going to be that easy. Because it's a capital improvement on someone else's building, it's not going to necessarily be that easy. So, I mean, that's something we'll struggle with at the board level to come up with a solution, but we'll have to come up with something. Because it is, at the end of the day, we've got to find a way to make it work for the community.
You keep referring your analogy that it's our building and not the region's. Well, 250,000 of us in this community are big shareholders of the region, so we're all in the same pot together. So it's just whether it's the right-hand pocket or the left-hand pocket. I had another question and I didn't write it down. I will say I'll come back to you. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Singh.
Comments, Mr. Chair.
Comment. Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah, just reviewing the budget that is here before me. You said that Tinker Truck is not going to be the only consultant or group that's going to be working. What happens if one of those, I mean, it's highly unlikely that Quartz Lab will go out of business, but Tinker Truck is an independent business that is also going into schools and doing parties and things like that. What happens, because this is, the initial partnership is with them, what happens if that business goes out under? What will happen then?
The partnership is with Cam Turner as a maker expert in the community. So it's engaging him personally to provide his expertise on the equipment and some of the program development. So I don't think that it would matter if Tinker Truck did cease to exist.
So you'd be hiring him as a consultant then?
Yes.
Okay. And just looking at the budget, I want to make sure I understand that you're expecting to make a profit already in June of 2018, a $500,000 profit? Or sorry, $500 profit. Boy, you'd be really excited if you made $500,000. Is it a deficit or a profit?
Yes, we're working towards the 10%.
Yeah, I mean, what we established as a board, and keep in mind when you're looking at that, there's going to be an allocation of existing costs. I mean, if you did it on a true cash flow basis, the reality is we're looking on a cash flow basis that it would be, we want a 10% return on the investment. So if we have $150,000 in it from a cash flow perspective, we're measuring success at 10% return on that. Not necessarily the accounting side, because, for example, I may prorate a portion of Laurel's salary into that because she's spending time in that. It's not the same, but that's why I'm saying from a cash flow perspective, which I think is the more critical measure, we're looking at getting a 10% return on that.
Okay, and it was pointed out to me that it is actually a loss that you're... Okay. Sorry, it's important that we have ability to converse with the delegation, not sidebars.
Okay, let's move along, people.
Sorry, when you're talking about the cash flow, you're not talking about the budget here? You're just talking about the actual monies coming in for the programs, the payment of the staff, the materials?
All that is in what you have before you, but what I'm saying is, because this is done on an accounting basis, you're going to have allocations of costs that are, whether we do this program or not, exist. But because they're now going to spend time in here, we're saying on an accounting basis, when our auditors come in, this is what it's going to look like, right, in terms of that. But I'm looking at it saying, at the end of the day, if it's positive cash flow, it's contributing to the balance of the operations to try and close the operational gap that we have. So this, from a board perspective, we're saying we need to close that sustainability gap, and this will contribute to that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gazzola, question? Okay, if you want to go ahead then.
Please.
Councillor
Did you have, has your organization had to fill out an application to the city for this funding, or how does this, we ask all our little organizations that want 500 to fill out copious forms and all of that and things. Did your organization do that for this or not? Or was it just a phone call? You obviously didn't. I can tell.
No, we did.
From
We
your
did not.
answer that you didn't. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Just a question of staff. Could staff just outline for me what we do give to the museum currently?
Just hold off on that for 1 second. We'll go to question of staff after. I just have one question to the delegation before we can let them go. My only question is, and I want to make sure we're 100% clear on this, is there a program like this that provides these sorts of tools and opportunity to children existing, to your knowledge, in the city of Kitchener at this moment?
No.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Are there any other... sorry, thank you very kindly for your presentation. There are no further questions. You guys can have a seat, okay? Thank you kindly. Questions of staff now? Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, if staff could just reiterate what we do give to the museum now. I have it here in the financial statements, but I just want to clarify it.
Okay, sorry, 1 second. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Bradford.
Yes, Chair, through you, Chair. As part of the 2016 budget, the museum received a Tier 1 grant in the amount of $114,603, comprised of $89,874 in-kind maintenance and $24,729 parking. In addition, $120,000 of cash was transferred from the former Arts Sustainability Fund and merged with the Tier 1 grant.
So that's $114,600 in a Tier 1 grant and $120 in a special grant. What is that 114? What does the in-kind cover?
I believe that would be things such as maintenance for the building.
Is that it?
Confirmation on that?
Yeah.
We'll go with that. Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah. How about, do we have to pay taxes on that building? Do we have to pay municipal taxes on the building?
Mr. Chapman?
Through the chair, no.
Is there any rent involved here, or is it rent-free?
Through the chair, it's rent-free.
If there were rent, what might it amount to?
I don't know.
Any ideas?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Perhaps we could look that up sometime, because it is an important figure that they are receiving a substantial amount from the city taxpayers already in free rent. We would all like free rent.
That's understood. Councillor Galway-Seelock, question of staff? Okay.
Yeah, I think it is. I was just noticing on page 4-3 that it said that the Lyle Hallman Foundation was giving $40,000, but then I see on page 4-5 that it's actually 50. That's confirmed. Was that our error in typo, or has things just changed?
Added from before they were 20, they added at 25. That's probably my mistake in the 40,000. I believe 50,000 is correct. 40,000 is what Christie Digital has given. Yes. So the Lyle Hallman is 50. The 40,000 is Christie Digital, which is going to operating expenses. The 50,000 Lyle Hallman is capital.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, not seeing any further questions of staff. Question of staff, Councillor Singh? Okay.
I had queued in for comments, but a quick question of staff. Just if you could allow me, Mr. Chair, the latitude to make a cross correlation to another building that we own, but another organization that runs it, similar to the Center of the Square. Would I be able to ask staff a question?
Go ahead and ask.
Yeah, thank you. So Senator Square is owned by us, but it's operated by a separate entity. We own the building. Do we charge CITS any rent?
Mr. Chapman?
Through the chair, no. This model is the same as many other cultural buildings like the Homer Watson House and Gallery, the Registry Theatre, as we heard earlier today. None of them pay rent.
How much do we give to them? Operational funding?
To the Center in the Square?
Yeah. 1.7?
1.75 million plus transitional funding.
Oh, it's a lot of money. I'm ready to make my comments.
Yeah, actually, we're going to go to Councillor Arnaitis first, who moved it.
Thank you, Chair Davey. I just wanted to go back to the previous report in the Arts Build Ontario, and I just wanted to make a quote in there because I think it's relevant for this and for something that we may be talking later on this evening. The quote is, "City-owned properties offer a more stable model for development of arts and culture spaces than do commercial spaces, and city-owned spaces should be leveraged for arts and culture, as it happened in the Registry Theatre, whenever possible." So with that, I'm pleased to support this because I think, as with the last issue, I feel Kitchener is at the crossroads of making some pivotal investments that could create the type of community everyone can be proud of and a quality of life that we can see families thrive and, in addition, help retain and attract talent, but more importantly, families to Kitchener. This is not only investment in our capital, in our building, but as a capital project, but it's also an investment in our youth. And I think it's a big win for our community.
Thank you. Councillor Schneider?
I just have comments.
Go ahead.
Okay. I love what I'm seeing here. I loved what I heard in the meeting that I had with Cam and Laurel. I do want to maybe add that Cam was also involved with Desire to Learn, and any references that were not made about Tinker Truck running this. It was Cam, his input, and he's very well connected with a lot of innovators and makers. What I heard is these capital investments would be great because they'd expand the number of people that can take and make use of what's going on there. I heard it was going to be great for our innovation, our future, the culture of innovation here in Kitchener. I think it's a win now, and I think it's a win in the future. And we're going to be able to, again, increase the capacity of people that be able to make use of this and the variety of things that are done there. So I'm very happy and proud to support this.
Thank you. Councillor Singh, and I would ask if you do intend to comment on this, please cue in.
You're saying to me? Or
no, not you, just anyone else.
Okay.
Go ahead with your comment.
I thought I did something wrong. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll speak to the amendment as well, and I will support the amendment because I think an initiative like this does speak to overall economic development strategy, and also it's important to know where the right monies are coming from. I think it was mentioned as to sometimes it doesn't matter if it all comes from one pocket to the other, but it's very important to know which pocket it's coming from. And the citizens, or Ward 6 residents at least, elected me to ensure that we look out the interest of City of Kitchener finances. And so that's why it's important that we always ask the right questions. And the right money comes from the right funding sources as well, like the Economic Development Reserve Fund. Mr. Chair, it's very clear to me that Makerspace with broad community participation will effectively help to develop our future workforce. This will promote fun and curiosity in our youth and enhance learning. It is in our collective interest to instill this appreciation of active creation. There is no argument that a maker culture is a catalyst for economic prosperity and growth. Why shouldn't we not want to support an opportunity for an atmosphere of fun and creative confidence? Without any question, we'll support.
Thank you. Mayor Rabinovich?
Thank you very much. I too will be wholeheartedly supporting this recommendation, and I'm fine to support the amendment. One of the places I visited last week was actually a makerspace. And believe it or not, it was actually a makerspace that was largely open to adults, but did do some children's programming. And in talking to them and talking to other people during our various visits, one of the things that became clear is it's really important if we want to truly grow this notion of an innovation corridor and see growth in the tech sector and the innovation sector. We need to see young people start to develop those skills in the STEM area at a young age. And we see that in the report. We see that in the answers we heard from the delegation today. And I think this is an important step in the right direction. We have a facility that right now is bringing, I think that it's upwards of 100,000 people to downtown Kitchener on an annual basis. This is a significant number, and to allow it to even grow further, to see more young people coming down here, and best of all, come down here with parents and grandparents. And I forget if it was Councillor Singh or Councillor Ioannidis that said, burn their fingers together as they're soldering and all those kinds of things that are part of the process of learning in terms of some of this stuff, I think is absolutely tremendous. It'll make for better use of the basement space, and I applaud the museum for being creative in not only thinking about how can they better use this facility, but more importantly, think about how these kinds of investments will better prepare our community and our young people for a strong and vibrant future in the region.
Thank you. Councillor Gazzola.
It's hard for me to speak here. I want to make it very clear when I start out that I love my mother, I love apple pie. And a lot of the things I'm hearing today is, this is a tremendous concept, and there are some amazing superlatives that you can deal and throw out on the table. But really, this is an area, quite frankly, it's an area that our educational system should be looking after. They did at one time, why they're not today. But I don't see this as a great shortage that's going to send us to our demise. I mean, it's just too much of it. We gave away $500,000 to Velocity. Then we turned around and gave another $1.5 million to Communitech. Now we have this on the table. Where there's another organization, Accelerator Center, another organization similar to this that is looking for our help. What are we to do here? I think we need to have some of these organizations go out and they are a tremendous idea, and all that tremendous ideas can pay for themselves. We can't always be asking the taxpayers to foot the bill for these things. So it's quite obvious that I won't be supporting this. The amendment is sort of redundant. I thought that's what the detail that's presented to us said, that they want to use capital improvements. So I won't be supporting the amendment or the main motion. I'd ask for a recorded vote on both.
Thank you. Recorded vote's been called. Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Davey. Just a point of clarification. This council has not given Communitech $1.5 million. We gave $300,000 towards capital improvements. But my comments are just around, I think this makerspace is going to be a terrific investment. I think because this is actually the city's building, that it's our responsibility to step up to the plate and contribute. We're not even the biggest contributor to this project. Makerspaces are extremely popular and becoming more and more popular, and I would encourage the museum to seek opportunities for collaboration. It was mentioned already by the delegates, and I just want to also encourage that, we are going to see emerging specializations at different makerspaces. Some will be stronger, whether it's in digital media or in, the number of sewing machines that are cutting edge or whatever it may be. And so I think that it'll be a really good way for us to encourage opportunities for the people who come to one makerspace to explore opportunities in others and see some synergies there. As a mother of middle school children, of course, schools do offer, they do still offer industrial arts, but at a much smaller number of hours than they used to when I was a student. And yes, schools do offer it, but it's not nearly enough. So let's step up to the plate.
Thank you. Councillor Fernandez?
It was very interesting to sit and listen to the delegations today and as well as last week. But I do feel we have a little bit of a stretch here. Sure, it's amazing that we can have some funding partnering with other organizations to do capital improvements on our own building. I think that's wonderful. But are we, and this is where my focus has been over the last week, just researching what is out there in the community, and I really think I just skimmed the top. Looking at our Leisure magazine and looking online at all the different programs that are being offered in our community that do some of the things that we are hearing the museum and the makerspace is going to be offering. My concern is, are we going to take away the business, the funding, the revenues from our community centers that are offering some of these exactly the same programming that I looked online that the Tinker Truck, Mr. Cam, I apologize, I forget his name all of a sudden, was offering. Are we going to be undercutting the other agencies and the other groups that are offering like the Button Factory, the printmaking, the painting, the photography, the multimedia, the Science Quest? I could go on and on and on, and I just skimmed the top. It's great that we have the building, it's good that we have the partnership, but do we really want to start supporting an independent business to consult for our space? Is that the right precedent we want to be setting here? And I think that's where my discomfort is coming. It's using the guise of economic development to use taxpayers' dollars on a program that I'm not completely and 100% comfortable with us doing. So, I applaud the partnerships that have happened. I think it's wonderful that families have been able to come in there and make birdhouses or rockets or whatever, but this is not the only place that this happens in our community. There are, right now, at least a dozen places that I'm aware of, and I'm sure there are more. So I find it a bit uncomfortable to support the $50,000 for the capital improvements because I think that we have the space. We should continue to do capital improvements, but not just for one particular situation. I think that there needs to be other ways of doing this. So I just don't feel comfortable supporting this at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Yaneski?
Thank you. Interesting project that we have here before us, and it is, of course, educational for the benefit of children and society and people who attend the museum, and grow with knowledge. But my first thought always that it would be an educational thing that should be done by the schools. And I'm just going to point out an example that just last week I happened to be involved again with the Waterloo Regional and Wellington Science Fair that's been going on for many years through the high schools and senior public schools. It took place at Binghamton Park. It's an all-day event, and I was participating in that through people I know from the teachers that have asked me to help out at that event. And I was amazed by some 100 projects that were done, similar to what's happening here, by the schools in terms of advancing and encouraging the teachers, the students, to create projects, create scenarios dealing with from science to industrial facilities to agricultural, environmental, a variety of things. And what I see here, it sort of ties in with what the schools are doing already. And so I was quite impressed, and I'm thinking, well, this seems to be like a nice to have project here at the museum. That stuff in education has already taken place in the school system. So I find it very difficult to support this, and I'm not going to repeat the comments that were raised by Councillor Fernandez or Gazzola, because I agree with what their position is as well, but I thought I'd just add this component to you all.
Thank you. Councillor Galway-Seelock?
Yeah, I support this project, and I had a lot of questions. I had a discussion with Valerie on my own because I wasn't able to make the meetings. I had some similar concerns that it was going to involve, or looked like from my perception, that it was going to be an independent business that we were supporting. And the answers that I received is very clear that that is not what's going to happen. What is going to happen, in the delegation said it over and over again, that it's like a consultant, or it's like our artist in residence, where we hire somebody for the year, they go out and do their project, and then they move on, and then you bring in a new artist the following year. It sounds like it's an exact similar situation. So while Cam may be that person the first year, he's not likely to be the second year, because it'll be somebody with this different expertise moving forward. But on top of that, the museum's going to have their own staff that are driving these programs that are employed by the museum, and not just a consultant. When it comes to the schools, I think what this can do is really ducktail what they're already doing there with some of the programs around summer camps. Well, kids don't go to school in the summer, so why not have this space so that they can go there? Or March break camps. It's the next step from what you're going to be able to learn at school, because some of the things that are going to happen in this space, the schools aren't going to, quite frankly, take on because of the risk. Because of the dangers involved. So they're not going to be able to do this at mass quantities in schools. So I think it's really something that can take what kids have learned in school and help them, if they enjoy it, continue to do that in this environment. I also think a really good partnership, and something that I've been able to participate in the last 9 years that I've been on council, is with Skills Ontario and the Young Women's Conference that I get to go speak at. And I think this is another opportunity that when the students get to go to that and learn about the skilled trades, then they can take that information and actually have somewhere or multiple places in our community that they can filter that energy and try out some of these different trades and maker spaces and different techniques in order to figure out where they want to go in the community. I had a concern about duplication, especially because there's some of these spaces in our library with our digital printer, et cetera. And through my conversations with Valerie, I learned that you can take the skills you learn at these classes and courses, and then you can still have that free space in our library to transition and go and do your project after you've learned how to do it from an expert. It can possibly also take away some of the staff time at the library having to teach people how to use the digital printer, because they've already learned it in this space. And so I think there's a number of synergies that this really can have throughout our community, from a program, community center program, to the library, to other organizations, and just giving more opportunity to continue to explore this. And one other thing that I just wanted to mention is I can liken it to us giving funds to the Kitchener Rangers for auditorium expansion, or an improvement in the auditorium. They're the one who's looking for it, but at the end of the day, we end up with a better facility for it, and the museum's already been able to leverage money, so we don't have to give the full amount for these improvements in something that's going to make our building better at the end of the day. And so I did struggle with this one off the top, but I think there's a number of great synergies that can just help this continue to move forward and assist our youth in our community to explore all opportunities as they try and figure out where they want to go in the future.
Thank you. I'll comment as well. My biggest concern in this coming forward is the misperception that perhaps this was more of a cultural addition, especially because it's taking place at the museum, when it really isn't. This is clearly an economic development driver for our community. We're at an intersection, I think, in time between software and hardware where there's plenty of opportunity, and it's quite simple actually to get out there and learn to program. What isn't simple is to access the type of hardware that people need to be able to create things. And as an economic development driver, some of the greatest companies in the world have started from people that have been comfortable making things on their own. I mean, it starts with, if you go back to the biggest companies in the world today, Apple, Steve Wozniak, the better half, in my opinion, of him and Steve Jobs, built the computer in his garage. They worked out of their garage. That was their makerspace. Michael Dell, from Dell Computers, same thing. He actually started taking apart Apple computers in his bedroom, and it was a while before he actually graduated to his parents' garage. That was his makerspace. And sure, those examples are old, but I even look at some of the major changes today. And being a tech guy, one of the things that I find fascinating is we're on the cusp of entering the virtual reality revolution. And it's interesting to note there's a single person that brought forward this revolution, and his name is Palmer Luckey. He's a kid that I guess he's not even 30 years old yet. And his company was recently bought by Facebook, and they're bringing forward his maker device called the Oculus Rift, which is ushering an entire revolution. But same thing, not long ago, he cobbled this thing together with a cell phone and some lenses and put it together with duct tape, literally in his garage, and captured the imagination of some people that were in place that had some money and could make the right connections. This is a long-term investment in economic development. And I think it's critically important because also, like the city of Kitchener, with all of the restrictions that we have, we cannot ever provide this sort of programming at a cost of an additional $50,000. I mean, that's representative of a single staff person alone. So the fact that it happens to be happening at the museum, I think, is a bit of a misconception. This is purely an economic development driver, and I think it's going to pay dividends in the future. Recorded vote has been called. We'll vote first on the amendment. Those in favor? And opposed? The amendment carries, and now the main motion. Those in favor? And opposed? Yeah. Oh, if you want to try that again. So again, start from the beginning. Those in favor? Oh, there was an error in the voting. Okay, can we revote on that, please? Thank you. Those in favor? And opposed? That motion carries. We are going to take a 2-minute stand-up break. I'm setting the clock here. Please be back in time, okay? Thank you. probably. Could everyone please take their seats? You're technically here, Bill. Okay, we do have quorum, so we're going to get going. We're actually going to swap items 5 and 6 because of the delegations. So item number 6, we do have a delegation here, but I believe it's just to respond to questions. Yes, okay. So I have the wrong screen up, one moment. So item number 6, questions. Item 6. Councillor Fernandez.
Yeah. I'm always a little leery of these agreements, although I have to say what Activa is offering is pretty juicy. Snow clearing and maintenance and water main costs, et cetera, et cetera. Just my only question really is how do we, because we've got the developers agree to maintain all infrastructure within the subdivision for 7 years. That's on page 6-3 instead of the standard 2 years. Mm-hmm. How and who does the policing of that?
So that'd be a question of staff.
Through the chair, as part of the credit for service agreement, the city will collect the maintenance costs of the pumping station, the water main, the snow clearing costs annually from the developer during those 7 years.
Okay. So just for example, we've had a fairly light year until April, but we've had some really heavy years with regards to snow clearing. They're saying $12,000 a year they're going to cover based on the different kilometers, and it will increase every year. What happens if we go above that? I mean, so are we're putting out the cost and they are going to reimburse, or they're going to give us the money up front?
Mr. Gross?
Through the chair, those calculations are based on average winters, so some are lower, some are higher, and it'll work out on average.
Okay, so if we have a really bad year and it goes over budget, they will compensate us?
That will be taken into account in the account that we collect. So a light year will offset a heavy year because the 12,000 is an average calculation.
Okay. I guess I just want to understand how that works out at budget time, I suppose, that if we are short, we do have a shortfall on the winter maintenance or on pumping station, I would imagine we wouldn't have so much of a shortfall on that. But the winter maintenance was the one that really caught my eye. Maybe it would be Mr. Chapman that would need to answer that. If there is a significant difference, how will that be shown in the budget?
1 second here. Okay, Mr. Chapman.
Through the chair, if there was a significant variance, that would be reflected in our variance report. Although I would suggest, given the value that we're talking about for snow clearing, it's unlikely that even if we had a catastrophic winter, it would result in a significant variance. We tend to report on variances greater than 10% and $50,000, and as you can see, in the first phase, the total annual cost is only $12,000. So I would agree with Mr. Gross that over the term of this agreement, any overruns should likely be offset by savings in mild winters as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Galway-Seelock?
Yeah, I was just wondering how these numbers relate to other previous agreements of this nature. Is it similar? One of the numbers that popped out in my mind was on page 6-3, right above the operating and maintenance costs with regards to the tendering process, the estimate exceeds the foregoing amounts by 5%. Is that normal in what we've done in the past, as well as the general subdivision infrastructure? Like, overall, is this fairly consistent for other credit for refund agreements that we've done?
Through the chair, in terms of the maintenance costs for pumping station maintenance, snow clearing costs, that would be similar to previous agreements that you've seen. Most current would be the Dune South pumping station credit for service refund, where those costs were the same numbers there, just the snow clearing cost was based on a kilometer So that's been updated a bit. In terms of the percent increase over amount tendered, that varies a little depending on project, but within reason.
So what has it been in the past? Past agreements?
Dune South was at 10. I believe the Dune South was at 10%.
Is that something we can strive for in this one?
I believe we are. Yeah. Through the chair, 10% is what the proposed agreement will be. The agreement hasn't been finalized to date. It's still draft going back and forth, but that is where the proposed rate is currently.
Okay, so the 5% in here is wrong?
Yep.
Okay. And then another question that I have just around the general subdivision infrastructure, understanding that typically if it was on time for 2023, they then would continue to pay these costs for an additional 2 years. So because it's starting 7 years early, did we consider looking at 9 years so that it's the additional 7 plus the 2 that they would have originally been held accountable for?
Through the chair, the 2023 date is when the city would construct the infrastructure and assume the maintenance costs. So even though there would be 2 years with our contractor at that time, it would still be under our maintenance. So that's why we did 7 years, because that's when we would construct the infrastructure.
But we usually hold the developer accountable for 2 years. So if we only built it in 2023, they would be accountable for it till 2025.
Through the chair, we would still be paying the maintenance costs, though, of the pump station during those 2 years, and the snow clearing costs, et cetera.
Right, but I'm talking about the general subdivision infrastructure in number 1. Is your comment still valid for that, or is it different?
Through the chair, it's as soon as the roads would be put on maintenance, it would be the city's cost to look after it during that warranty period for snow clearing, et cetera.
Okay, maybe I'm just not making myself clear. Maybe we can have a offline discussion on that one point. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gazzola?
Yeah, I'm just curious, staff could tell me why we don't just charge actual costs for those things after the fact. Why?
I'm guessing cost certainty, Mr. Gross?
Chair, what we want to do is have a certain amount of certainty as we move forward in these agreements, and the agreements make the developer liable for certain dollar values.
Can I interrupt? That's not. I'm not questioning it. I mean, they're going to have to pay the cost. You've estimated a cost. Why don't they just pay actual cost after the fact? They're not.
Through the chair, to be honest with you, the tracking of actual costs within those specific subdivisions for those kilometers would be very difficult to achieve.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear. That it's difficult. You don't have specific accounts for that. Okay, that's a simple answer. Very good. The other question I have is that what about we're looking here at a 7-year period. Now, what about the liability issue? We're taking on considerable liability 7 years before we would normally do that. We're collecting from them for maintenance and snow, but how about our liability issue costs? There's got to be some costs there.
We don't take ownership.
How is that dealt with?
During that 7 years, the liability that the city incurs now, I'd have to just double check with our insurer, but it would seem to me that it's an open right-of-way. If the city, let's say, snowplows do damage, or if there are issues like that, then certainly that would be something that the city, for which the city would be liable. If there are accidents on the road, it's an open right-of-way, and it simply falls under the traffic bylaws.
But we're going to get into incurring a lot of costs here 7 years before we plan to if we didn't go this route. So is there some kind of compensation or consideration for that?
We've calculated as many of those costs as we're able to. I'm not sure how you would calculate a liability.
Well, okay, I would like to leave it here that we might think about this because it could be. I'll leave that for staff. Another just quick question. I wonder if Mr. Chapman could just do a quick run through as to how this operates when we start collecting DC charges, just to give us a refresher.
Through the chair, Mr. Haggie is here, and he was involved in authoring the agreement, so perhaps I'll let him speak to that.
Mr. Haggie.
Sure. So through the chair, the questions about receiving the development charges in this area, if I'm correct?
Yeah, what's the process when they're going to have paid, say, $500,000 up front? So how do they recoup it? What's the process? What does it do to us, if anything?
Sure. So the Activa will be paying for the full price of to install the pumping station. So the cost of the city at that point is zero. Then no refunds. So actual cash payment would be made until 2023, which is when we plan on building this ourselves in the first place. In the meantime, between when it is constructed and when we plan to do it, Activa will be available to get credits. So they on that specific service, so only on this the sanitary service. Essentially, when they come in and pay, they will have to pay development charge, the full rate minus the sanitary portion. So they will pay a reduced amount of development charges for that subdivision for the period of time between when it's constructed and when the refunds come into being.
Okay, so if they've got in year 3 500 new units coming, you figure out the price and they don't pay anything, and that comes off of the $5 million.
So they only save the sanitary portion, so we will still be getting all of the other, so they would pay the roads portion, the parks portion, all those other pieces. They would only get credits on the sanitary side.
Okay, so what happens in 2023 when it is the year that we would have paid it?
We will do a calculation as to how much development we anticipated would happen versus how much actually happened, and we will refund Activa based on the proportion. So if we don't meet our growth target, Activa does not get fully repaid at that point in time. They would be, so if we only hit 60% of our growth target, they would be reimbursed 60% of the total.
Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Yaneski.
Don't go away. I have two questions, but we'll start with the one that, since we're just talking about the development charges. There's a portion on page 6.5 that you talk about reaching 60% of anticipated development revenue, if that's the way the sanitary portion is going to be credited to them, because they still have to pay for the other stuff, the soft services, as you pointed out. Okay. Is that within a certain time period that would kick in only, or after a certain time period? And that's what I didn't quite understand the way this is written.
So between when the agreement is signed, we have a forecast for development charge revenue. So we lock in that time frame, that revenue forecast, and that's what we assume we're going to be getting. Then when we get to 2022, we will review what we believed we were going to get between 2016 and 2022, look at what we actually got in that time frame, and we'll just figure out the percentage of what we actually got in that time frame versus what we thought we were going to have, and Activa will be compensated based on that proportion. Okay,
so then this statement here on page 6.5, it talks about the 60%, and then the developer as being anticipated revenue, and then the developer only be entitled to 60% for that year.
Right.
Those are something between 2016 and 2023.
Right.
So if it's the following year, let's say you get more revenue, then that could increase to 70%?
Right. So if they are not fully compensated by 2023, which is when we thought we were going to do it, build it in the first place, say we thought we were going to pull in $100 million in that time frame. If we only pull in $60 million, they're entitled to 60%. The next year we get another $10 million, then we'll calculate the following year that they should have been paid out 70%. They've already received 60%, and so they'll get 10% the following year until we reach our revenue target.
Okay, I understand that. So that's fine. The other question I have dealt going back to previous page 6.3, dealing with the engineer's cost estimate on the 5%, which now you're saying it's 10% of the preliminary estimate above. So that's 10% above the contingency figure. That's another 10% on top of the 10%, which is now 20%. Because there's always a contingency figure always added in.
Pardon me. Mr. Gross.
Through the chair, the estimates always include contingencies.
I'm sorry, say it again a little louder.
Pardon?
A little louder, please.
The estimates always include contingencies.
Right.
And the cost estimate that has been prepared and that will be included in the contract is including contingencies. So the amount over that contract that was originally indicated by the developer as being 5% would include 5% of that total number.
Now you've lost me.
Okay.
But there's always a contingency. So is the standard contingency 10%?
No. Through the chair.
And I know it varies depending on the risk
The
factor.
contingency will vary depending on the level of the design.
Right.
So whatever the contingency is, it will be included as part of the cost estimate.
So with this being...
And then if the actual tender comes in higher than that estimate, then the developer has the option of not proceeding with the project. And all we're doing is we're setting the percentage that the tender would be higher than the estimate. Now, and just to clarify, the 5% was not an error. The 5% was the amount that was requested by Activa up until now. Now, we've heard just recently now that they are certainly willing to go to a 10% figure based on the request that was heard. The agreement, as mentioned, is not yet final. So we're in the process of finalizing it now.
Okay, and I appreciate that. So using an example, I know you've got the pumping station here is about $4.5 million, but let's just round it off for $5 million for calculation purposes. Mm-hmm. If the tender comes in at $6 million, that's like 20% over.
Correct.
So then the developer would have to make a decision as to, well, do I go with it or not?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey. So my question is basically just on a high level. So basically this agreement is for the city to recoup their costs because this is being built up 7 years ahead, correct?
Through the chair, it's intended that the infrastructure can be completed sooner than later, with the developer paying the dollars up front and collecting them later.
Okay. Have we looked at depreciation values?
Depreciation values, I'm not certain of the question.
In particular, so if we're building a pumping station 7 years ahead of time, and then they pay up front, we've kind of lost 7 years worth of depreciation. So has that been factored in?
Through the chair, the depreciation factor has not been figured into any of the assets that are being constructed.
Okay, well, I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with that. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Haggie, do you want to comment on that?
I just want to add something to the comments. It's true that depreciation isn't in. The other thing is we'll be collecting sanitary revenue 7 years earlier than we would have expected in the first place. So we will have cash flow that we weren't anticipating either. So there's somewhat of an offset there.
Thank you. Councillor Galloway-Seelock?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up since Hans has mentioned that 5%. It would actually be a detriment to the city if we actually increase that to 10%, right? Because then we would be on the hook for a 10% over tender as well to pay them back.
Through the chair, it's not a detriment to the city either way. It's whatever the developer feels comfortable with in terms of proceeding with expending their money.
Right, but if a tender came in over 10% here, we would, as council, have the opportunity to say no to it, right? And in this case, if we go through with this agreement, if it's 10% over, we, as a council, might not have the ability to say it because our agreement says if it's 10% over, that Activa can proceed.
Through the chair, council always has the ability not to award a tender.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Fernandez?
Yeah, just a couple questions related to the Dune South pumping station because I think it was Activa that paid for this one as well.
Monarch.
How far? Oh, sorry, Monarch. Thanks for the correction. How far in advance was that pumping station? How far out? I'm wanting to say it was about 4 or 5 years, but it could be because I'm thinking it was 2019, 2020.
Through the chair, I wasn't in the position, so I'm not certain.
Okay.
We'll get the date for you.
Okay. There was residents that were impacted by that particular project. I don't know what the setting is for this particular project, but will the developer be responsible for any impacts? For example, the people had to move out of their house for a period of time during the work. Was it the developer that had to pay for that, or was it the city that had to pay for those kind of things?
The city did not pay for those things.
Okay. Were you able to find out the date? Yeah.
Ms. Cooper?
Through the chair, it was 2019 is Dune South Pumping Station Agreement, so 4 years.
It was 4 years. Okay. I think what Councillor Ioannidis raised was a very interesting point, that maybe that's something that we should be considering in our formulas when we discuss these credit for refund agreements. Okay. That's all the questions I have.
Councillor Yaneski?
Yeah, just one follow-up question back to Mr. Hagee. And then we're dealing with, this is a 7-year time period. The development charge bylaw is reviewed every 5 years, 4 years, 5 years? 5. And when it comes up for review, would this project have to be reconsidered in that review time period, or based on the agreement that's going to be registered on here, that just holds total water?
Through the chair, it would not show up as a project in the DC study, but it would be, we take into account all of these types of agreements we have when we're figuring out the future cash flows for development charges. So whether, it's not going to make a difference. It'll be considered either way, whether it shows up as a project or whether we have an agreement in place. If we do have an agreement in place, it does lock in the timing. Whereas if council didn't wish to go forward with this and it was still in the capital forecast, but there was no agreement, then council could, move the project around or change the priority of it. But once we enter into this, tender it, the time frame for refund is fixed starting in 2023.
Okay, and that's what I was wondering, because if you're going to be looking at the development charge and yet you're going to be looking at the 2023 time frame because you want to be sure that all the calculations from what has been already built and still outstanding or what's still to be credited will be taken care of via the agreement.
Right, and it would be considered in the next study, so the rate that is set or considered by council in the next DC study would account for this, whether it's hard and fast in an agreement or whether it's just a proposed project.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And Councillor Ioannidis?
I'm just prepared to move the recommendation.
Well, that's good timing because there's no one in the queue. Any comment on this?
Can I make just a quick comment?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I think overall this is a pretty reasonable, fair deal, and but in the future I hope that we can, within the report, that we can see somewhere where there's the depreciation value with the amount of costs that we're going to recoup through services. So just to be a little more transparent, that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So it's been moved. Councillor Gallo-Sila, comment?
Yeah, just wanted to say that this project didn't get the smoothest start. It being in the ward that I represent, we got the EA complete. We're at this point. I'm a little hesitant just from the perspective of 7 years early. I am pleased to see that if we move forward with this, that the work can be done in conjunction with the region in their planned road operations to only disrupt the traffic once. So I'm going to support it today, but I do, in this circumstance, appreciate having the time frame between now and council to discuss with staff some of my questions and concerns that I'm not sure completely got answered, but I will support it today. But we'll see what happens at council.
Okay, thank you. So it's been moved by Councillor Arnaitis. Those in favour? Oh, recorded vote's been called. Those in favor? And opposed? One opposed. Okay, and we'll now deal with the final riveting item of outdated policies. I don't think there's any staff presentation on this, so we'll take questions right off the bat. Any questions? Okay, it's been moved by Councillor Gallo-Sila. Do you have a couple? Good try to slip people in the queue. Councillor Singh.
Give me 1 second to give me my page. So just a question for clarification, 5-4, hiring of senior management vacancy. Can staff elaborate a little bit more on the existing policy and why this is being recommended to be taken out?
5-4, the very bottom one, HR?
Yeah.
Hiring of senior management vacancy. So the brief description's over on the side, but staff wanted to comment as well. I'm not sure who would speak to it. Mr. Chapman.
Through the chair, I believe committee has had some experience with this policy. The key policy statement is that in the filling of staff vacancies resulting from termination or retirement in grade 13 and over, the department head and CAO shall prepare a report which outlines a number of considerations and submit that informally to members of council. As you'll see with a number of policies, it was felt that this requirement is inconsistent with the municipal code chapter as it relates to the chief administrative officer, which outlines his authority for essentially all staff in the organization, including the hiring and the terms of employment for senior staff.
So as it currently sits, are you saying the policy infringes on the Municipal Act?
Not the Municipal Act, the Municipal Code.
Oh, the Municipal Code, sorry?
Yes.
Transparency infringes on the Municipal Code?
Again, through the chair, I don't believe it's an issue of transparency. This is really about a communication between the CAO and the department head and council. Typically, matters that relate to this would be personnel and relate to individuals, or often they do. Really, I think it goes to the relationship between council and the CAO as their one employee, and then the CAO having responsibility for the balance of the organization.
And exactly, so does that not one employee owe a certain due process of informing, especially for senior management? That's why, again, I don't have really a big issue with this, and I don't think this council or previous councils have hindered in the CEO in making the right decision. that's related to resource matters. But now I'm a little bit more, I pause with my concern because you're saying the policy infringes on the municipal code, but I also see some wisdom of having it in place. Is there a way of keeping it or amending it so that council still kept in a loop while we're still in compliance to the municipal code?
Through the chair, I'd suggest that has in fact been our practice. As it stands right now, every position that falls in that category has to essentially go through a council vetting process. And I think we would agree that there are many positions, either a statutory requirement or no one would dispute that they're required positions. I think history would say that where there's a question in terms of what council's expectation is for the role or a question on how we restructure it, those things are communicated with council. This would simply take out the absolute requirement for all positions to go through that process.
Right. And I raise this question not for this particular council or our particular CEO. I think there is a good level of communication between both. Again, we're taking this policy or changing it where my concern is for future occurrences and future councils with future CEOs. Can this matter be brought at a later point where amendment or process could be looked at where there is a defined policy that does correlate, process of communication with the CEO back to council when changes are made for upper level management personnel?
Mr. Wilmer? Through you, Mr. Chair, I think that is an alternative that while it's our feeling that this policy is redundant and can be repealed, if it's council's preference to have it replaced with a policy that has more current wording, we'll take your direction on that.
Could I refer it back to staff to,
if
this were to be taken out and refer it back to staff to bring it back with suggestion?
I'll take that as yes. So
thank you.
We'll move the main motion with that as your inclusion to refer that specific one. Thank you. Councillor Fernandez?
Yes, I had the same concern as Councillor Singh. Additionally, there's one also on 5-4, the top of the page. This one is talking about the identification of principles for numbered companies. I don't understand why we have to repeal that. I think it's important that we have a sense of what those numbered companies are. Additionally, the other one I had was related to the policy stating the city will not finance any capital costs relating to development of private industrial land. But the city does not and is not required to have such a policy. I need a little bit more clarification. I did read the policy, but I'm just a little bit puzzled on what that means in order to not finance private development. Can I have a bit more clarification on that one?
Mr. Chapman?
Through the chair, this is a curious policy. It's from 1979, so it goes way back. As you know, it's only one sentence, and so it strikes me that it was dealing with a very specific issue of the day in 1979. I think the point here is that certainly council's ability to finance any private development are extremely limited under the Municipal Act. That said, there are some instances in the past where the city has been a partner to industrial land development. Regardless, you don't need a policy to say that either you will or you won't. I think at the end of the day, you've made those decisions on a case-by-case basis and are governed by the law. So we saw this as a 40-year-old policy that is not relevant anymore and therefore could be repealed.
Okay, thank you. On page 5-6, the first two, not the first two, sorry, the one was about establishing the conflict of interest protocols around procuring consulting engineers. Now, are we not doing an update on that? On our procurement policies overall.
Mr. Chapman.
And our tenders.
Through the chair, yes. And that's why you'll see for a number of these, the Director of Purchasing has indicated that we will incorporate where necessary any of this wording in the update to the policy.
Okay, so that's why I'm asking for that one and the second one to hold off taking it out of our policy until we've done that update, because there may be a need to have some of this wording in the new procurement policy. It seems like I feel like we're jumping a little bit ahead. Once we understand what the whole procurement policy is going to be and the changes, then maybe we can say, okay, we'll repeal these two policies.
So in the second case, it's my understanding that policy really isn't legal. In order to have the legal right to split an award, that needs to be reflected in the bid document itself that the vendor responds to. Simply having a policy that says we reserve the right to do it doesn't actually give us the right
I'm
to
sorry.
do it.
It's the third one. I apologize.
Canadian preference?
Yeah.
Again, I believe that the law has since changed. So at the time that this policy was written, it may or may not have been a legal practice, but certainly we're now governed by the act that's referenced there, and so we cannot enforce this policy even if we wanted to.
Okay. I would still like to, the first one, I'd still like us not to repeal that until we've done our fulsome tender procurement or procurement policy.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Fernandez, before you click off.
I have one more.
Oh, okay.
Okay. On page 5-7, about the snow removal, the policy established means by which staff will be deployed for snow clearing. These protocols are now incorporated in the shift work. What are we doing now? Are we doing something different?
Through you, Chair Davey, this is the last time this policy was reviewed was 25 years ago, and we have our practices incorporated into our management and labor management policies now. So this is really a policy that's not necessary.
Okay. All right. So, Councillor Davey, you had something you wanted to ask me?
Yes, thank you. So I just want to make sure I'm keeping track here. So Councillor Singh's referring the one item back, and you had an issue with, I want to make sure I didn't miss it, it's the principles behind company?
The number one, the policy established a conflict of interest protocols around procuring consulting engineers. That specific one was one I was concerned about because I want to make sure that any of the language that we include in our new procurement policy, our purchasing bylaw, that if this shouldn't be repealed now, that we wait to repeal it once we've done that review.
Okay, I apologize, I'm not...
Top of the page, 5-6.
Top of the page, 5-6. Oh, okay, very good. Okay, so, and Councillor Singh's referring them back to staff for possible revision, I guess, for council is the intention. Is your intention the same for these two?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Yaneski.
Yeah, I'm the same opinion back on page 5-6, the procurement with the engineers. I think it's premature to remove it because it should be still in place till we get the new one in place. So I'm just confirming Councillor Fernandez's comments. That's where I was coming from. That's it.
Okay. Mayor Verbenovich.
Thanks. Just one quick one. On page 5.5, I-910, the massage parlor one, it says this business is no longer in business, and so it's not required. I'm just trying to understand what that was. Is that dealing with some of our adult ones? Sorry? On Belmont? Just want to make sure that whatever we're doing doesn't accidentally open a door for...
So it was, again, a one-sentence policy from 1973 that a massage parlor license be issued to the VIP Club, 690 Belmont Avenue West, Kitchener.
Okay, that was like the 40-year ago round of massage parlors, not the 20-year ago round.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
And Mr. May?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm a bit confused, and so I just want to be clear. If one of the items that is potentially being deferred is the policy around principles behind a company, I thought if that's one of them that you're deferring, I would just speak to that issue. Certainly, it's staff's opinion that this would be a very labor-intensive practice to undertake, given the number of times those kinds of names can change. And so there really is limited value in maintaining such a list. If we ever needed to get the names behind a company for legal reasons, we could certainly do it at that time, but that's a much more efficient way to do it.
Okay, I think what we will do is vote on, we'll vote on these items separately, all three. Yes, separately, yes. Councillor Fernandez, comment on that?
Yeah, I just, maybe Mr. May and I are on talking about different items. So I just, which one were you speaking about? The 200 contract, it says I-200 contract separate parts of work on page 5-6, or the conflict of interest consulting engineering?
Mr. May, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, neither. I was referring to what I believe was one of the first items you brought up, which is on page 5-4, second from the top, I-275, related to principles behind a company.
Okay, and with your point of clarification, I'll take that request off.
Okay. Okay, there are no one else in the queue. No one wants to talk about hawkers and peddlers. Okay. So we will actually, Councillor Singh moved the main motion. We'll vote on his referral of item, the HR item at the end first. I don't think we need a recorded vote for these. So. Sorry? Oh, it's page 5-4, the very bottom of the page. Councillor Marsh, have you in the queue?
Yeah. Sorry, just before we let this go, just a quick question to Mr. May regarding the policy you just referenced, I-275 on page 5-4. So my understanding is that this is for when we are approached by numbered companies for proposals or building permits or whatever. Is it really onerous on our staff, or is it? Would it not be fair just to ask the representative of a numbered company to name the owner at that time in case there's a need for that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, both planning staff and legal staff have said that this is not a criteria by which we can consider development applications. So there's very little value in us collecting that information. Having said that, if we ever got to a point where there was a legal reason to do so, we could, on a one-off basis, get that information.
So if, for example, we have a lien on a building that is owned by somebody, if they own another building under a numbered company, then we have no jurisdiction over that second numbered company.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I don't want to pretend to give legal advice to council, but my understanding is both legal and planning staff have said that this is not an appropriate criteria by which to look at applications.
Okay, diplomatically put, thank you.
Okay, so we'll vote first on the referral, which again is at the bottom of page 5-4, the HR. Those in favor? The HR item at the bottom of page 5-4, okay? So again, those in favor, keep them up for a second, so you need to look both ways. And those opposed? And, sorry, Councillor, okay, 2 opposed. And we will now take the conflict of interest, which is at the top of page 5-6. Councillor Fernandez, correct? Yes. Those in favor? And opposed? Okay, and that carries as well. And the motion as amended, those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, that concludes Finance and Corporate Services. We'll take just a break, like a 2-minute break to switch over to Community Infrastructure. Thank you.